Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Book Tribe podcast. And this season, we're deep diving into key skill areas for authors who are looking to build a business out of their writing. And today, I'm joined by Harry Evans, co-founder of 1225, the audience first SEO and social agency. Welcome, Harry.
You're one of the very few people who gets the name right first time round, so thank you for that.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I've had, I've been practicing a little bit because it's a bit of a tongue twister. But yes, no, thank you so much for joining us. And actually, Harry, we know each other from school days as well, so it's great to reconnect with you and talk to you about this topic. I think it's something that for authors it can seem hugely overwhelming to be like, oh, I just want to write, and now you're telling me that I have to think about SEO and social. It's just too much. So I'm hoping that we can simplify it for our listeners today. But before we get started, we have to ask a very important bookish question. And that question for you today is going to be, if there was one book that you would recommend to our listeners, what would that book be?
So it's pretty straightforward for me. I'm not much of a reader. Like normally all of my consumption is digital, podcast, audiobooks, etc. But there's one book that I've read from start to finish in a day, which I've never done before. And that is Shoe Dog, the autobiography by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. It was so good. It was, I think as someone like myself who, I guess my main passion in life is business, combined with, I guess, travel and sport. Like it was a perfect blend of all of them. But yeah, I'd recommend anybody go read it. It's an incredible book.
And was it sort of his personal journey, or was it the kind of the business journey that you took more from that?
Great question. I'd say probably a mixture of both. So it only recounts up until the very early days of Nike. It doesn't go all the way through to signing of the big sports stars and to where they are now. It's very much when he was like selling shoes out the back of his car and flying from Japan and back to meet suppliers and things like that. And I think it was more how free he was. Like even though he was building this huge organization, obviously one of the most well-known companies in the world now, but he was incredibly free. And from what I understand, he tried to keep that even up until the point of where they are now. So yeah, that's probably my main takeaway.
Amazing stuff. Well, thank you for that. And hopefully some of our listeners will go away and take a look and maybe get that same, I suppose, like sense of grafting and kind of hard work and adventure from that journey as well. But let's talk about 12. No, yes, I did get it right. 1225. Damn it, not quite rolling off the tongue yet. Would you mind kind of giving us a brief introduction to how you kind of started the agency, and what was that journey for you?
So it was a long one, is probably the way that I'd describe it. Not in a bad way, but I guess like I said in the previous answer, really the big thing for me has always been a passion for, I think, creation, and that creation has always expressed itself mainly through business. So like back in the school days, it would have been like selling iPhone cases to whoever would buy them, those kind of things, and then moving through into stumbling across what we do now in digital and really knowing that I wanted to start something, but never really having the courage to do so is probably the way that I describe it. So I've been doing what we do now for the last 12 years. It's gone way quicker than I would have assumed. But yeah, I've been doing it for 12 years. And eventually it was just a case of the stars aligned for us. So 1225, we describe ourselves as the audience first SEO agency. The big focus is on the audience and potential customers, not the SEO part. And we very much saw and identified that shift that was happening late 2022 into early 2023, where like I think most people describe it as like the TikTokification of social media was coming in, and Google was trying to navigate people potentially away from the traditional way of searching into more social media platforms and things like that as well. And if we distill that down, the big thing for us was very much that everybody is trying to put the customers front and center again, which has probably been lost a little bit. And I think this is like relevant for anybody trying to market or sell anything, which is it's very easy to start using the word data and things like that. And what you forget is that data is people. It's just an accumulation of people doing an action, right? So if it's a website, you might be like, oh, we had 100 people come to the site, but you normally look at that in data. Like, what is the data saying? And it's been, a real focus of ours to try and distill it back to the basics of people, not data. And if we can be people first, then ourselves and our clients should benefit from that.
I find that so interesting. And I want to talk to you more about kind of what audience first means in just a second, because you also run a podcast of your own called Building, which I've fortunately been a guest on. And it was so much fun talking to you guys during the podcast. But did you want to quickly just tell us about that and what listeners can take away from the podcast?
Yeah, so I love podcasts. Like, I listen to an insane amount of content, and pretty much every decision that we've made over the first year of our company, it has been very much focused around things that we've learned or listened to from podcasts. But I think it's also been a source of frustration, and it's something that I'm very conscious of. Is quite often, if you listen to like a business focused podcast, the guests will miss out the first 5 years of panic and stress and anxiety in that fight for survival, and fast track to the 10, 50, $100 million exit, and look back with rose tinted glasses. And we definitely weren't feeling that in the early days of 1225. Or it goes the other way, where you'll find podcasts potentially like the trap that we could run into today, where you give like the top level advice into something, and it's very easy to just give like a top line answer. So for example, how do you want to grow an audience on social media? It'd be very easy to give the default answer of, well, just start posting. And that is so like unattainable, because like, what are you going to start posting? Who are you going to start appealing to, etc., etc. So our podcast Building has been focused on finding people like yourself who are very much in the building stage of their company. So year 1, year 2, year 3, and talking about the challenges, what makes them really good, what keeps them going when, let's be honest, it can be really, really hard. And I would describe it as there are a lot more downs, but the highs are just really high, and what keeps people going. So it's a podcast designed to tell people stories and to, from our part, selfishly learn from as many people as we can. And yeah, hopefully we're at the stage now where we're crafting our processes a lot better to extract more value from guests, so that our audience can find it as valuable as we are.
Yeah, and I think for authors, there's still a lot there to be learned. It might not be directly in terms of, experience and experience are exactly the same, but there are some pieces to those stories that you're telling, like personal branding, leveraging community, that still authors might be able to take away from.
Yeah, I think it's all of that, and it's something that we had toyed this week and last week actually that we've been speaking a lot about, which is some of the guests that we've had on recently. You wouldn't describe them necessarily as your like in the box business owner. Like maybe they're like a solopreneur just running a one-man business, or they're a freelancer, or like you said, they're maybe more in the creative space. Like we've had some social media influencers on and things like that, where like technically you're trying to build something in your own entity, like you would fall into a business owner. But like you say, you may not categorize yourself as that very stereotypical, I'm building this thing, therefore it is a business. And there's still so much value that you can extract from all of it. So if you take it back to say like an author, you have the building stage of the book. Like, I'll be honest, like building's not going to help you there at all. But you ultimately want as many people who are going to find and enjoy that book as possible to get their hands on it, to see it, and all those kind of things. And yeah, like you say, we have many guests talking about personal branding, how to leverage social media. Obviously, you guys came on and talked about how to build community, which I think we'll probably focus a lot of today on as well. So yeah, I think it's just because you may not be your, like I said, in the box business owner doesn't mean that you're not trying to build something.
Absolutely. And that's, probably where a lot of these authors are, is that they're on their own and they're building their businesses. So let's go back to the audience first question. We've already kind of talked about what it is, but how does that differ from how people are currently still looking at SEO? Because I guess there's a way that it was done for the last 10 years, and it seemingly overnight, I say seemingly overnight, like in the last year or so, we've really seen SEO move about in terms of how it gets ranked. So do you mind telling us a little bit about that transition, and how is audience first different to that traditional perception?
Yeah, so we could spend hours on this, and I'll try and keep it as top level as possible while still giving some value. So the biggest change has come about more because of the platforms that we're leveraging more than anything else, right? So if you take marketing as a principle, like we always use the phrase that like marketing just came about from like a creative salesperson, right? Like the goal of marketing has always been to sell something, whether that sounds crude or not. Like it's true, like marketing is designed to be a sales channel. What happened is obviously years go by, we move away from like, well, we went from like newspapers to billboards to TV and now into like the web age. But the way that you could optimize campaigns, or in what we do, search engine optimization, has been only as to like the limitations of the platform. And that platform has always been Google or Bing when it comes to SEO. And for the last 10, 15 years, that has been very much what we describe as keyword and data focused. So what are people searching for? What is that keyword? So let's keep it very simple, like glass bottle, for example. And then you'd have to write content, and all the things you'd be doing is just optimizing for a keyword. What has happened is that these platforms are now evolving, again, like I said, because of the way that TikTok has really captured the world's imagination, and it's become much more, I describe it as principles and values based rather than keyword based. In that has allowed SEO to mold and almost like go back to basics of forget about a keyword. What are your audience really interested in right now? How can we provide them value? What are the stages of what we would call the buyer's journey? So whenever you're making any kind of buying decision, you go through a cycle of 3 to 4 stages of awareness. So you're first learning about something, through to consideration. So if we put that into the author space and books, for example, like you're probably first just learning the genre or the style of what you're really interested in. But then obviously, regardless of which direction you go in, that could be fiction, non-fiction, it could be a very specific computer manual, for example. But then you still have the consideration phase because there are multiple authors authoring and producing many books. So you have to decide which one that you're going to go with. And then you go through to the decision stage. And where SEO has evolved and where we have evolved is really trying to put ourselves in the audience's shoes as they're going through that buyer's journey. And that is molding the way that marketing in general, not just SEO, marketing in general, is moving forward. And the way that we really like to think about it is the world of marketing is a very scary place at the moment with AI, and like marketers and people in the teams that we built were last year pretty worried for their jobs. But what we're just doing here is if we can strip it back down to basics and make it as simple as possible and as audience centric as possible, regardless of what changes come about with AI or marketing or whatever may change, those principles, if they've been around for 100 years, they're probably going to be around for the next 100 years as well.
Yeah. And I guess as well, it's also about, delivering value to your audience at the same time, because yes, you're addressing the questions that they might have, or the searching that they might be doing at any given point in that journey, but you're also delivering value in that same transaction.
Yeah, and I think value is very subjective, and that can become like a limiting factor as well, which is it can be easy to put yourself in a box and say, well, if it's entertainment, then it's not value. And that then leads to quite a lot of samey, very formulaic, could be boring styles of content generation, because we forget that by providing some entertainment, you are therefore providing value. And I think in this space, especially like with many like creatives, essentially in any form, like the value is in the creative, it is in the experience, and it's easy to forget that because entertainment doesn't necessarily feel like value.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, actually, as you say, like the value term could be such a broad term. And when it comes to the audience first kind of strategy, or even this shift towards audience first SEO, how does that then impact content creators and people who are trying to sell through places like social media?
I think the first thing is like you got to talk to people, and that is like a very weird sentence to say because obviously it sounds very obvious. But I think if I think back to my early days in marketing when like I was trying to figure out the world. I was still young and trying to build websites and try and sell stuff on the internet and things like that. Like you could be mildly successful without talking to anybody. Like you could start the website yourself, you could find the products, you could sell the products through Facebook ads and never need to talk to anybody. And I think really now that whole process doesn't exist anymore. The way that you're going to extract the most value from anything that you're doing is, I don't know why my phone keeps ringing. It's very annoying. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I can't actually hear it. So
it's my entire computer's on do not disturb. It keeps ringing. Let me just turn everything off, and then I'll keep going. Right, there we go. Back to it. So where was I? Extracting value. So the big thing is the way that you're going to extract the most value is by talking to people, which sounds obvious, but it's not. And I think when it comes to even the creative process at the very start, right, is you could, if you took the very surface level advice of just getting started, you could lock yourself in a room, spend an entire year writing this book, have one person read it and go, this is a terrible idea. But if you get a list of ideas, take that to like 5-10 people and soundboard it, you're going to have that level of confidence before you start the full writing process. And then the same goes for the marketing of that asset. In this case would be the book or whatever it is that you've produced. Soundboarding what those marketing ideas are going to be like. Does that appeal to the people that you want it to appeal to? Is fundamentally very different to how it has been for the last 10 years.
Yeah. And so when it comes to, we'll go through kind of like the steps to kind of starting that SEO journey in a second. But do you find that there are misconceptions about SEO that you'd like to kind of debunk, like anything that is really kind of maybe even holding people back?
Like there is a full-scale trust problem with what we do, and I think that can make the barrier to entry quite high and quite low at the same time, which is like SEO, like any marketing practice, but more broadly kind of like anything in general. Like it is a real discipline where there are real professionals that provide real value, and in return for that obviously there's a value exchange, normally in monetary form. The problem is that has over the last, again, 10-15 years been capitalized on by people with various different incentives to do so, which means that normally like pretty much every circle of friends or relationship groups and things like that, there's going to be one or two people who have tried to build something, whether it's their own business or, like you say, write their own book or whatever it may be, and have been burnt by people in our industry. So I think the big thing that I try to debunk is that we're not overly clever people. Like SEO is incredibly simple. There are 3 things to it, which is a very solid website, producing audience first content, and then making sure people see that content. Like fundamentally, SEO is incredibly simple. And if you're talking to people who are trying to add extra complexity, you're probably talking to the wrong people. And I'm not saying that as a sales strategy. I'm saying that as we're trying to, like, anything that we do in marketing should be simple. And if it starts to sound complicated, there's a problem. And I think, yeah, that's the big thing that we're on a quest to try and debunk at the minute is it's very simple, but that doesn't mean that it's not difficult.
Yeah, no, I get that. And actually what you're saying about kind of if it's seemingly too complicated, then perhaps it's just being made complicated. It's like with marketing, the best some of the best marketing are the ones that are so straightforward. You know, it's like my dad Ian talks about Obvious Adam all the time as like a huge inspiration. Like, let's not overthink this. Let's just be really simple and straightforward with, you know, what it is that we're trying to do, and therefore the messaging around that. And actually it could be done reasonably simply in terms of, you know, building a message around something.
Yeah, and I think it's like, again, like it's like if you ask me to write a book now, like, and it's a question that you asked me before we started recording, right, which is like, have you considered writing a book? That process sounds incredibly daunting. But then if you went to speak to someone who, you know, is maybe a very published author or has written a number of books, the advice there is probably going to be quite simple. It's going to be like, look, you have a beginning, middle, and end. You need X, Y, Z. If you can execute that, you're going to end up with a pretty solid story. And you're going to sit back and go, that sounds incredibly simple, but like that is the reality, and it's the same goes for marketing. And yeah, I love the principle of like say like an obvious Adam or something like that is a great foundation to build on.
Yeah. So I want to kind of go to the first steps then. How does an author or even anybody kind of take their first steps towards building an audience first strategy? Does it require a website? Does it require, are there kind of key elements to that? Where do they start?
Great question. And I think the best place to start is you need a very well defined audience, right? Like if we're thinking audience first, we have to have something to start with, and that is going to be an audience. And the way that in marketing or in SEO we consider an audience is we would talk quite a lot about a buyer persona. So what does your ideal reader look like? And what I'd want to do there is be as evidence back as possible. So if you've already started to, let's say the book is published, it's out in the open, really looking at who is buying and reading and engaging with that book, not necessarily who you want to, because they can be two different things. Like that is an exercise that we do with a lot of our clients, is define your target audience or who you think your ideal customer is, and then let's go and look at your actual customers. And quite often it can be different. So that would be a great place to start. But obviously you have to be a little bit further down the road there. Like you have to have something out and you have to have people consuming it to be able to do that. The other way is to treat it as simple as possible in the form of who do we want our ideal readers to be? What do they look like? What are their traits? Starting to map those traits to buying decisions. Like, so if they were going to be buying my book, like what would they be thinking about? What potential objections would they have? And normally it'd come down to things like not knowing what to expect, not having enough information, not being able to make an informed buying decision because maybe there isn't enough content out there explaining what your book or series or whatever it may be is about. So once you have that clearly defined, deciding what content to create and where to publish that content becomes incredibly simple. Because you might even need a website, if I'm honest. Like if you can really nail your target audience down, understand how they're consuming and engaging with content, it may be that social is the perfect platform for that. You're like, actually, you know what? Facebook groups are a hotbed for this right now for your category of book, whatever it may be. I'm going to go there. Or it may be actually there is a bigger commercial opportunity here. I'm going to build a website. And we've seen a few cases of that in the last couple of months where that is beneficial as well. But the best place to start, again, say it's like all that advice. It's very simple, but define your audience and then you can build from there.
Yeah. And as you say, you might not necessarily need a website. In fact, with authors, there are so many different places where they'll have a landing page of some kind, even if it's, their Amazon profile where they're selling their book, or whether it's Goodreads or one of their social media channels. There's so many different landing pages. As long as there's a way for people to find you and to stay connected with you, then maybe you don't need a website,
Yeah, I think so. I think it's in this space especially. Like I said, there are a few examples of people monetizing beyond the book incredibly well with websites and things like that. But if we strip it back to its basic form of you have this asset, you want as many people as possible to see it, the real way that you're going to achieve that is going to be via community building more than anything else. Now, that doesn't mean like let's all head down to the local community center and do like a book club or whatever. Like it can be like on a global scale, like we see examples of that as well, but that can be done via social, can be done via a website. It's at its principle, and its core, it's just where are your customers, like where are your audience, and wherever they are, it's probably a pretty sound idea to go there as well.
Yeah. So when it comes to kind of building this strategy, say they've got a website and they've got a few social channels and they've got a bit of everything. Is it then, when it comes to this audience first SEO approach, that they kind of need to approach it in a holistic way, that it needs to be consistent amongst all the platforms, or does each platform require something different?
So I think at its core, the first thing that I'd say is don't try and be everything to everybody. and you don't need to be on everything. Like I think that's why that understanding the audience is so critical. So I'll put it in my shoes first of all. Like, we are a business, we have to sell, and we try and sell SEO services. The people that we're selling to, while they'll have an Instagram account, they'll probably have a TikTok account. Like, when they're on those platforms, they're not necessarily thinking about making B2B buying decisions, right? They're probably like, if it was me, I'm scrolling golf content. If I'm on Instagram, I'm in a very different headspace. So while we could be across all those platforms, like, we're a 4-person company, we haven't got the time in the day to do that. And again, like, as we went back to the very start, where we were talking about most people on their own here, like, trying to create something that they're incredibly passionate about, just doing that as an achievement, then thinking you've got to be across 5 different social media platforms, have your own website, maybe have some kind of online community, have to be publishing on Medium or whatever. Like, the list could become so daunting that you just are paralyzed by looking at a screen of all these things to do. So it doesn't need to be holistic. Yes, like, you need to have a very consistent message across whichever platforms that you're going to be on, but 1 or 2 platforms is probably going to be enough, especially to get you started.
Yeah, as you say, it can be an overwhelming thing to, you were saying about overwhelming the idea of writing a book, but actually for authors it's probably overwhelming writing a book, but then also overwhelming getting through this. How do I even start to promote this? Where do I start? So when it comes to content, we've kind of briefly touched on it. With each different platform, do they need to think about how they distribute content differently on each platform? Like, because obviously TikTok being a short video platform, obviously that would be short video. But then, is that really important that they kind of really think about what content they're putting where?
Yes, definitely. So the way that I would think about content is that it's incredibly broad and can mean many different things. And I'll start by just answering the same thing I've answered for all of these, which is, depending on your audience, they're going to engage with content in different ways, right? So the way that I would think about that, with a massive sweeping statement, but it's true, is that my parents, like, mid-50s into their 60s now, like, their attention span is a lot higher than, like, the attention span of my sister, who's 21. Like, it's just the way that technology and social media has changed people's psychology. So that already is got to define the type of content that you can create. Like, if you want to reach my sister, anything over like 400 words, she's probably not going to engage with. And ideally, she probably just wants to see it in the form of a short form video. Whereas if you're trying to sell into my stepdad, like, he would happily read like a 2,000 word essay on something if that's providing value. So audience first, again, taking it back, like, how do they want to consume the content? And then from there, the next question to really ask yourself is, how do I like creating content? Because that can be another blocker here, is you know you need to be providing value. You're going to provide that value in the form of content in some way, whether it be written or video. Is like, how do you like doing it? So Brendan, my co-founder, he really hates doing like direct to camera video. He loves podcasting, like, we have a podcast, so he loves that, but he knows that he can't add value by just talking to a camera and looking at it and talking. And he also hates it, which means that if I ask him to do 10 videos in a month, it's not going to happen because he really dislikes it. So find your form of how you like creating content as well. And then from there, and we'll probably come on to this, is you need to make content feel accessible. The way that we make content feel accessible here at 1225 is by thinking about content in terms of pillars, and those pillars essentially just relate to topics. So regardless of what genre and what category your book is in that you've authored, you probably have an unlimited number of ways that you could be talking about that. And what that could end up with is a very distant and could be confusing form of distributing your content, because each platform could be different. Each time you're tweeting or writing or creating video, whatever it may be, could be just so different because you have so many different options. So the way that pillars work is you go, I'm only going to talk about, say, 2 to 4 different types of content and different topics. So we did that very early on in 1225, and it worked incredibly well, because we said we were only going to talk about our journey of building our business, SEO, because that's what we do, social media, because that's what we do. And then we had a pillar that was just a bit more like ad hoc and freeing to allow us to talk about like client case studies or something that we've really struggled with from it's just been difficult, or something personal, like, oh, we were playing golf today, this happened, these kind of things. So like an element that allowed personality, but we knew that if we're only ever talking about one of those four things, you quite quickly build what we'd call brand category affiliation. So you start to think about like, 1225, the SEO guys, or like really simply, you get it a lot with like sports stars, right? Like you might not know anything about I don't know, LeBron James, but you probably know he's a basketballer because he's been able to build that brand category affiliation, and you can do that through what we call pillars and topic clusters and things like that. So yeah, that is how I would achieve it. And like I said, those big things are: find where your audience are, find how you like creating content, put your content into pillars, and it will feel way less daunting once you've done all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even talking to you now, I'm like, what content pillars do I have? Because I actually don't know if I've sat down and thought about it for my personal brand, and also, the book tribe as well. But the book tribe is interesting because we've got these two different audiences. There's the readers, and then you also have the authors, and we're trying to talk to both of them. I don't know if authors will have those two sides in kind of the early stages of their career. So they'll probably have readers where they're trying to build up a reader following, but later down the line they might also have other authors that they're selling to. They might be selling a writing course, they might be doing speaking engagements, so they might end up having to address multiple audiences. What's your advice for kind of navigating that multi-audience challenge, I guess?
So two very quick pieces, I think. So the first one is, don't do both at the same time. Like, you're going to make it very difficult for yourself if you try to do that. Like, eventually, can you do both at the same time? Absolutely. But don't try and do both at the same time as a starting point. Again, you're just going to get to that feeling of overwhelmed and confused very quickly. So the phrase that we always use is pick your favorite child. Like, which one's it going to be in the short term that's going to give you the most amount of value? Hedge your bets there. But when it comes to actually achieving that, like, longer term, the two big things that we would focus on are the platform. It's going to be different, most likely. Like, as soon as you start to get into that, like if you take your point around likely going to be trying to sell into other authors as time goes by with courses and things, like, you're probably moving more into like a mindset of where are people going to be when they're wanting to learn. YouTube, LinkedIn, X, whatever it may be. Whereas when they're wanting to be entertained, they're going to be somewhere else. So your readers are still going to be on a different channel. So you can divide and conquer a little bit by platform. And the other thing is, like, as people generally, like including myself, anybody in this, we're inherently lazy, like, or we don't have a lot of time. We need to qualify, as we would say, ourselves in or out very quickly. So with whatever content you're creating, when you are trying to do those like two different audiences, make sure you're qualifying which audience you're talking to within the opening 3 seconds or the opening sentence if it's written form, because then you can quickly just allow the others to just disengage with that and then come back, do the same process again, and go, actually, no, this one is for me. I'm going to engage with that.
That's yeah, as you say, it's kind of actually simple almost to kind of just define straight away who you're talking to. And I think I was reading somewhere that actually, having it in, so if it's a video like a TikTok, for instance, having it as the first thing that someone sees when they kind of scroll onto the video, have it in the description as well, because then you're kind of like getting it on both sides. So yeah, no, and as you say, that actually picking your favorite child, just keeping it super simple. And I think that's probably what the case will be for, I think a lot of authors will probably be in that boat of, I just want to sell books. And the more books they sell, the less likely they are to go and, build a course that they want to sell, because they're not trying to create new revenue streams for themselves. From our conversation today, and also kind of conversations that we've had previously, we've spoken a lot about personal branding, and like in the case of an author, it would be author branding. Do you think that all of this kind of comes down to having a strong author brand. How do those two, how does SEO and author brand or personal brand relate?
So there are two ways to really think about that. The way that I think about it is the brand is the most critical thing that you can build, regardless of industry, regardless of what you're trying to achieve. Like, take it, even if, like I said, me and my fiance had this conversation the other day, which is like, you might not have a business, you might not have anything to sell, but even if you build your own personal brand within an organization, that can still bring value to you as an employee. But if we look at author brand and how that correlates with SEO, I think the big thing is that building a brand creates a very obvious byproduct, which is some kind of community and some level of investment in your success. Like, that is just, even if you're not deliberately set out to achieve that, you're going to achieve that. Like, very first answer I mentioned about how I love the book Shoe Dog and Nike. But if you think about that, even they have done exactly that. They built a brand. The objective of building that brand was to be able to sell things. But if you really look at what they're leveraging now, is they're leveraging the community element of that byproduct, which is just that if you're buying into that brand, you're probably very similar to a bunch of other people that are buying into that brand. How can we add value and continue to fuel that ecosystem? And it's the exact same thing here, which is if you build your author brand, there's a very, very good example of this, actually. So there is a author called Jack Carr, and he has a series of books called I think it's called The List Terminal or Terminal List, one of those two ways around. And he is essentially, I think he's a former Navy SEAL in the US. He now writes books based on like fiction, but based on his time within like Iraq and Afghanistan and things like that. And his entire play has been transparency and having people buy into him, so that when he had these books to start essentially pushing out there and getting people to engage with, they were so bought into him that it was a very seamless transaction of like, I have this thing now, it's now ready to go. So building that author brand is going to set you apart from everyone else, because they're invested in you, and then whatever you produce is just a byproduct that is going to be much more seamless for you to sell into.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's almost at the beginning of that writer journey. You might even just be thinking about writing a book, and I think you do see this sort of a lot already, is that a lot of authors will join kind of Instagram or TikTok and those bookstagram communities and start to build relationships with other readers because they're planning on writing and selling a book. And I think people already kind of instinctually have that idea, but I don't think they really understand or connect I want to write a book, this is what the book's going to be about, and I'm actually now, how can I build this brand and this community so that when I do launch that book, it's there's a group of people to sell it to already.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, though, and this is very easy to miss, is it has to be authentic. And you said it very early on as well, and you said it on our podcast when you came on our podcast, is that you have to be value-led and you have to be providing genuine value. So you have to, if you're starting to join these communities and starting to, like you say, build up because you know that you have something coming, if you're the person who's just always talking about themselves, it's going to be very hard for you to form real world connections. So I think whatever you're doing when it comes to building that author brand, you have to be thinking about what is true to you, what is authentic, and then how can you authentically provide that value in order to build that investment and those relationships and make it real. Because if you don't, you will have, and we see this quite often actually, is that you can have a lot of followers. Right, you see this all the time, is that like you'll have these influencers with 1 million, 2 million Instagram followers. They'll then try and launch something to the market, but because there's been no value add from them in the short term or even the medium term, those products just fall flat. So yeah, building something value first and authentically is critical. Otherwise, everything that we've spoken about won't work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So We've spoken previously about the mistakes or misconceptions of SEO branding, but SEO strategy, sorry. But when it comes to personal branding, what are the common mistakes that people make when it comes to building their personal brand? Do you have kind of any thoughts on that?
Copying. It's easily the thing, and I don't even mean that in a bad way. Is that we all do it. If as soon as you're getting asked to start producing content, and quite a lot now on social, it's going to be video content. Your default immediately is going to be to try and replicate things that you've seen that you like, or try and replicate styles or presenting or ways of talking that you have seen from other people that you engage with. And that could even be on the micro scale. It might just be like, actually, Brendan sits next to me all the time. I see how he's done it, so I'm going to replicate that. The problem that you have then is that, one, it becomes very cringe very quickly most of the time because it's not you. It works for someone else, but it doesn't mean it's gonna work for you. And two, so much effort goes into that replication style that everything else that we've spoken about in terms of those clusters and defining your audience, and it all goes out the window. So copying is a very obvious one. The next one is like stopping too soon. So if you don't have an audience and then you start posting out content, it's obviously going to get very little engagement. It'd be like going into just like an empty space and shouting and expecting a response. If there's no one there, you're not going to get a response. So continuing to go, even when the data and the metrics are telling you it's not adding value, is something that we see over and over again. It's like I tried that, I did 4 posts, didn't get anything, so I stopped. Like, you're not going to, it's too soon. So being committed to making it work over an extended period of time, combined with not copying other people, are the simplest piece of advice I can give to anybody trying to build a brand.
Yeah, no, and that copying is also, I suppose the question comes down to, when it comes to the copying, is, is it important to be jumping on viral trends, or should you not be jumping on viral trends? Because the book talk community is one of those where, you see people kind of use the same viral sounds and same kind of viral formats. What do you think about that?
I think formats are great. Like, the virality in terms of formats is great. We talk about a lot about repeating content series are another great thing as well, because, and I heard this phrase so nicely on a podcast the other day, which was like, TV shows work really, really well because you know what to expect, right? So I think like Friends ran for what, like 10, 11 series?
Years, yeah.
10 years over a 10-year period. But every week people would tune in, and obviously it's back then, like, you couldn't binge watch it either. It was like, gotta wait till Tuesday when it comes out. Is that you knew exactly what to expect. You knew when you turned it on at 7 p.m, this is what is going to happen for the next half an hour. And I think that's when like repeat content series can come in really well, which is if you're doing something over and over again with just a slight spin on it each time round, people know when they start watching what to expect. They know the format, they're familiar with it. It's low friction for them because they don't have to try and learn, they just have to consume and enjoy. So I'd say double down on like repeat content series. When it comes to virality and trends, I think that comes back to what we're talking about around authenticity and how it can become cringe quite quickly, which is you have to really ask yourself, am I just doing this for the likes, or am I doing this because I think, one, it's me, and two, I can provide value? And there are ways that you can do that. Normally it's going to be that, like, even if you just course correct by 1%, you can still get on that trend and put it in your own unique way as well. But you have to just be really careful that it is you and it's not just something that you've seen on the internet.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about hashtags quickly as well, because people would be like, oh, so how do I use hashtags? So I just wondered if you had any advice for authors on, because there's also kind of different types of hashtags as well, isn't there? Like short form, long tail. Like, what would you suggest people do when they start to think about the hashtags that they use?
So I think, unfortunately, this isn't that straightforward in an answer. So top line is that each platform treats hashtags differently. Their main objective across the board, though, is for categorization. So like these platforms, these social platforms especially, are trying to understand what category and genre of content you are creating. And a good way that they can leverage that is through the hashtags. Now, the key difference, though, is that how your content gets discovered is very different on platform by platform basis. So this is what we refer to as the TikTokification. So TikTok is very much based on real people providing real feedback, right? Which is like, so it's trying to show you the content that it thinks you want to see, not necessarily the content that you're searching for. That's why if you go on your For You page and scroll TikTok, it's like drastically different to if you go on your Instagram page. Instagram is more like, although it's changing, it is more like a search engine. So it expects people to be searching. It expects to be able to categorize those searches by the hashtags that you're using. So hashtags are going to be more important on, say, like an Instagram over a TikTok. They can both work as a way of categorization. But the one thing that I would say is, coming back to the repeat content series idea, is that if you are using hashtags, which you're probably going to be doing, try to keep a good cluster of those the same on every single post. So the way that we do it is probably like an 80-20 split. So I wouldn't put a number on it because that number varies. Like if you read the advice from 2021 to 2022 to now, like it's all going to be different. So I wouldn't really want to put a number on it. But what I would say is an 80-20 rule is usually a good split of 80% the same every time. 20% is going to be very specific to that piece of content that you've generated.
Right. Yeah, okay. That's useful to know, because even from, myself, I'm like, what? I'm using different hashtags every time. There's, I think there's like maybe a few that I keep the same, which if I'm posting to TikTok, it's like book talk, or if it's Instagram, I put like bookstagram, and try and keep it as consistent as possible. But yeah, I think it might be one of the big questions for a lot of authors is, how do I use hashtags? But I think, as you say, that 80-20 helps to kind of keep it relatively simple and keeping it to those big category topics.
And I think like you have to be the way that, so our advice for anybody on like when they're pushing out personal brand via social is always like, before you start posting, you have to become a user and a consumer, because you have to understand what is working, what content styles are working, but also you have to find where your audience are. So like, what hashtags are they using? Like, how are you finding the content that you want to be finding that is similar to your content, so that you know where to start? Like, longer term, I'd definitely rather someone be a poster than a consumer of that content, because you're going to get more value from the posting than the consumption. But yeah, whenever we onboard a client, we normally say to them, like, your first 2 weeks are going to be the easiest working with us. Like, you just need to go on TikTok, or you just need to go on Instagram, and you just need to understand what is working, what you like, what you don't like. And in that process, you would discover things like, what hashtags are providing value, should I be using those hashtags, and things like that.
Yeah, well, Harry, we're actually really running out of time already. I didn't realize how quickly time has gone this afternoon. So I think I'll just ask one final question of you, which is something that we ask all of our guests, just to leave us with one last piece of advice for the authors who might be listening. So do you have one last piece of advice that you can give to our authors before we finish?
It's nothing new that we haven't spoken about already, but I think the key piece of advice, or the one thing that I'd want anybody to take away, is go and speak to people and learn as much about your audience, their consumption habits, the things that they like, the things that they don't like. Learn as much as possible, and if you can do that, everything else is going to feel way less daunting, and it's definitely going to be more successful.
Amazing stuff. Well, Harry, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful to catch up with you, first of all. But to everyone who is listening, if you'd like to hear more from literary, publishing, marketing experts, then make sure to subscribe to the Book Tribe podcast channel, or join the Book Tribe author community to connect with our network of author service partners and make more connections with authors just like you. But in the meantime, just keep on writing. And Harry, thanks again. It's been wonderful to chat.
Thank you so much.